Picture this. The year is 1978. There are children playing in a schoolyard and notice some excavated soil. The children, being so curious, begin to play in the soil without any worries. Not long after, there is an ambulance in the adjacent neighborhood. The child has burns on his arms. Soon more children end up with first-degree burns. The mothers of the children fear there is something in the soil. One of them decides to investigate. Before long, there are protesters and news vans invading the neighborhood. Something is very wrong with the soil. They believe it is contaminated by toxic chemicals. Many years pass by, and the neighborhood is slowly abandoned. A once vibrant neighborhood is now decaying. This is the story of the Love Canal, a disaster that would haunt this community and leave an indelible mark on the town that is best known for tourism. The town is Niagara Falls, New York. Let's take a closer look at this disaster. The physical site of the Love Canal originated around 1894, excavated as part of William T. Love's ambitious plan to create a navigable waterway and power generation system branching off the Niagara River. When the power project was abandoned, the partially excavated, mile-long trench lay unused until the 1940s. From 1942 to 1953, the Hooker Chemical Company, operating with government sanction, utilized the canal as a primary disposal site for its industrial chemical byproducts. Upon the cessation of dumping in 1953, Hooker capped the 16-acre landfill with a clay barrier before selling the land to the Niagara Falls School Board. The property deed included explicit language attempting to absolve the company of any future liability associated with the buried waste. Despite this documented awareness of the hazardous contents, residential development proceeded rapidly from the mid-1950s through the early 1970s. This expansion resulted in the construction of a large neighborhood comprising approximately 800 homes, which surrounded and, in some cases, encroached upon the original 16-acre landfill, including an elementary school built directly over the waste. The scale of the disposal operation was immense, involving the burial of an estimated 21,800 tons of chemical waste materials. This waste stream included highly volatile and dangerous compounds, encompassing chlorinated hydrocarbon residues, processed sludges, fly ash, acids, chlorides, phenols, and pesticides. Laboratory analyses of soil and sediment samples later identified over 200 distinct organic chemical compounds at the site, with about 100 positively identified. The inventory included extremely high volumes of certain contaminants. For instance, hexachlorocyclohexane accounted for 6,900 tons of the total waste, making it the single largest component disposed of at the site. Chlorobenzenes were another major constituent, accounting for 2,000 tons. Of particular concern was the presence of dioxin. Although the compound itself was not intentionally dumped in bulk, its presence was confirmed because 200 tons of trichlorophenol manufacturing precursors, known to produce dioxin as a byproduct, were buried in the landfill. The highest quantified level of dioxin reached approximately 300 parts per billion in a storm sewer adjoining the canal. The failure of the disposal site was not solely due to the breakdown of the clay cap, but was fundamentally driven by the combination of elevated groundwater and compromised infrastructure. The unusually high precipitation levels recorded in 1975 and 1976 raised the water table, causing drums to surface and contaminated water to appear in backyards and basements. The Love Canal story is often told through the image of a single heroic figure, but the exposure of the disaster near Niagara Falls was the work of a broad, determined, and diverse coalition of residents, local leaders, and allies. The most visible leader to emerge from Love Canal was Lois Gibbs, a housewife whose discovery that her son's school playground sat atop buried chemical waste galvanized her into action. Gibbs began by meeting neighbors, collecting anecdotal reports of miscarriages, seizures, and other health problems, and organizing them into what became the Love Canal Homeowners Association. They held frequent neighborhood meetings in living rooms and community halls to share testimonies and to compile lists of births, miscarriages, cancers, and other health problems. They invited journalists and scientists to document conditions, collected photographs and samples, staged public protests, and used media coverage to amplify their demands. Sustained activism at Love Canal culminated in concrete political outcomes. Community organizing led directly to the evacuation of hundreds of families, state and federal emergency declarations, and eventually the creation of a national legislative response, commonly known as Superfund. Activists' public testimony, media campaigns, and legal efforts framed Love Canal as a symbol of regulatory failure and corporate negligence, creating the political momentum needed to pass sweeping hazardous waste legislation and to institutionalize mechanisms for cleanup and liability that persist today. Despite mounting evidence of toxic exposure, ranging from chemical residues in basements to alarming rates of illness among residents, Hooker Chemical consistently deflected blame. The company emphasized that the land was repurposed against its advice and that subsequent development, not its dumping practices, caused the disaster. This stance frustrated residents and activists who saw the company's position as evasive and indifferent to the suffering of families living atop the waste. Hooker's reluctance to accept responsibility also complicated cleanup efforts and delayed compensation for victims. Legal battles ensued, with the company resisting claims and challenging the extent of its liability. It wasn't until intense public pressure, media scrutiny, and government intervention that broader accountability was enforced. Eventually, Hooker, by then a subsidiary of Occidental Petroleum, was compelled to contribute to the cleanup costs under the newly established Superfund law. The Love Canal disaster remains a haunting reminder of a past shaped by industrial greed and institutional neglect. The community's suffering became undeniable, and the disaster catalyzed sweeping reforms, including the creation of the Superfund program to address hazardous waste sites across the country. The oozing chemicals, the abandoned homes, and the anguished families serve as a stark symbol of a time when economic ambition eclipsed ethical responsibility. In remembering Love Canal, we confront the cost of neglect and the enduring need for vigilance, transparency, and justice.